Hello, everybody, and welcome to our post-action, post-prison, post-court wrap-up. We are here, we're all members of Extinction Rebellion. We'd first like to acknowledge that we're conducting this conference on the stolen lands of a variety of different nations of the First Peoples of this country. We'd like to acknowledge that that land was stolen, sovereignty was never ceded, treaties were never signed, and we'd like to acknowledge the elders of these peoples, past, present, and emerging. And we'd like to hope that in our fight against imperialism and colonialism that's destroying our planet, we can help them and join their fight that they've been carrying on against these things for over 200 years. And I'd like to also acknowledge that we're in a time of climate and ecological emergency, and that our actions this day and all days will affect directly the future habitability of our planet. And so here we are at the end of the Duty of Care campaign, or at least this phase of it. To give you a quick recap, rebels from all up and down the east coast of the country came to Canberra and began a week of actions, beginning on the 3rd of August with a roadblock at the headquarters of APPIA, continuing on the 4th at the Department of Agriculture, Water and the Environment in protest against Susan Ley, who was recently federally mandated by the federal court to have had a duty of care to the young people of our country, to protect them from climate harm when making decisions about fossil fuel projects in this country. She's appealing that ruling, so we went to the department to communicate our displeasure. And we revisited the department 2 days later when we went into the foyer and gave it a bit of creative and political redecoration. To top it off, we took it to the big house itself, Parliament, where Violet, who's sitting next to me, set fire to a pram and glued her hand to the ground. A few of the other people on this call also glued themselves or spray painted at Parliament House. Myself and Andy spray painted some messages for the Prime Minister at his house, the Lodge.
Don't forget the actions that happened in Melbourne.
Yes, I'd be, of course, remiss not to mention the duty of care action that happened at Josh Frydenberg's office on, I believe it was Thursday the 5th, which saw 2 arrests, Tim and Trevor, and would, I'm sure, have led to a much broader and more intense campaign had not lockdown stymied our momentum, unfortunately. So in Canberra, after this suite of actions was over, 7 of us refused bail and were remanded in custody at the Alexander McConaughey Centre. 5 of us got out on the 17th, having gone in on the 10th. We were there for 8 days. Sergio came out a few days later, on the 20th, I believe, and at last, Violet is out today. We had our court cases for these actions yesterday and today, and other than Violet, who has unfortunately, for convenience sake, had her court case adjourned till next Thursday, all of the matters are closed. Yesterday, we had Daisy, Sergio, not quite all the matters, I should say. Daisy, Sergio, Nick, and Leslie faced court. Daisy and Sergio and Leslie had their convictions quashed and no penalties or convictions recorded, in a victory, I think, for our movement. Nick, on the other hand, pled not guilty and will be going to the Supreme Court for a trial by jury. And we'll ask him some questions about that very shortly. Today, Andy, myself, John Worker, Ross Brown, and Violet faced the court. Everyone except Violet had a conviction recorded for our various actions and arrests, and quite so, and now face gargantuan fines of $20 per charge. Detect my sarcasm. Like I said, Violet has been adjourned. Her matter has been adjourned until next Thursday. And so it remains that the matters of Coco and Abel remain before the court. And it's those 2 that I'd like to ask some questions. to shed some light on the experience of this campaign of prison and of court. So, first of all, Mr. Abel, or should I say Dr. Abel, what happened at court?
It's quite funny you said Mr., I mean Doctor, because I was actually using that as a ploy. So every time I appeared and the magistrate said, Mr. Abel, I said, excuse me, it's Dr. Abel. I'm here as an expert on the impacts of climate change. And they were always very apologetic. And yesterday, the prosecutor was profusely apologetic. I felt quite bad about being such a pompous asshole, but it was probably worth it. In any case, I needed to communicate that I wasn't there just because I was a bit pissed off. I was there because I was fucking angry. I hope this isn't going to children. My impression of the actions is that they were incredibly well organized. Just as an academic, I'm fascinated in the way groups work together and collaborate just to spontaneously come up with stuff. And this group works together amazingly well. I have to say, much better than any bureaucracy I've ever worked in. So good on you all for doing that. And different leaders emerge at different times when different needs become apparent. And I think you guys really could set up a consultancy business telling government bureaucracies how to do it in order to pay off your fines.
And so rolling you back around, what happened at the court yesterday, other than the magistrate being profusely apologetic?
Yes, so it's actually not true that, because just beforehand, luckily, there was some knowledge there about the order in which things happen in the court. And it turns out that before I was actually asked to plead, I was asked the prosecutor was asked if she was willing to have it heard in that court, and she was. And then magistrate asked me if I was, and I said, no, I wasn't. So I never played anything. And it's deferred until I reappear in the magistrate's court in November the 25th. And I'm not sure if we're going to use it or not. It says that there's no way the trial will be until next year. So yeah, that's what happened.
Fantastic. So back to the Supreme Court on the 25th.
I can keep talking. Try and shut me up.
Just quickly, what were you arrested for?
Sorry, was that to me? Was that to me?
Yeah, Nick, what were you arrested for?
Well, it was two things. First was gluing the evil crime of gluing my hands to the bench at the Department of the Environment and asking to see Susan Ley, when the person at the desk said she doesn't actually work here, which was a complete surprise to me. We had no idea she didn't have an office there. And the second arrest was actually for a rather feeble attempt to spray duty of care on the walls of Parliament House. And although I had a new can and I tested it beforehand, the bloody thing ran out. It didn't run out, but it blocked after D. So I'm going to the Supreme Court to face a jury saying I sprayed D on the walls. D for dunce in graffiti.
Fantastic. I'm going to throw to Violet now. Do you want to give us a quick recap of what you were arrested for, what happened at the court, and tell us a bit about prison?
Yeah, well, it definitely wasn't for D'ing at Parliament House, but I lit a pram on fire at Parliament House to really call out the danger that our youth are in with the inaction of the government and the climate emergency. Yeah, so I spent the last 2 weeks, maybe just a touch longer, in custody at AMC prison. And then what happened at court today was, yeah, they basically dropped the damage charges. So I'm only charged for trespass, and that they didn't have permission to charge me from the Crown or something. So I'll be back in court again on the Thursday. So I don't know. We'll probably do another longer session to really dig into it, and it's too much to really explain in this time. But I survived. We survived.
Fantastic. Thanks, Violet. We want to throw back to Nick, I think. Or actually, maybe to Sergio, if you feel comfortable talking, Sergio. So XR actions seem to be escalating in terms of their shock value and their level of disruption that we're causing. Why do you think this is, or why would you say this is?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Yeah, so XR actions, they seem to be escalating in terms of their shock value and the level of disruption that we cause. And I'm wondering if you could speak to why that is. We're having some technical difficulties on our end with Sergio. So I wonder if either Nick or Violet has anything to say to that question.
Yeah, I think it really comes back to Roger Hallam's PhD, which is, the more radical you're willing to be, the less people you need to be just as effective, essentially. And in times of COVID, it's very difficult to mobilize the 3.5% of the population that we were initially aiming for. And so now we've gone with a different and, as you can tell, just as effective tactic. I think that from what I've heard of the stats of what's happened from this action, this has been the most successful run of actions that XR have done. It's reached the furthest, and it's had the most political engagement, as well as engagement with the public. So it really does prove that the more sacrificial you're willing to be, the more you can achieve. And I think we all know that in our heart, but to see it actually play out in the real world has been, really inspiring.
And let's hear from Nick on this question.
I strongly suspect that the brilliant idea of burning the pram is also been a major coup, because you can't forget that. They won't forget it, and I think that one was absolutely marvelous, perfect.
Fair to say then that the takeaway here is that iconic images, powerful images combined with sacrifice as part of our strategy of escalation is what's brought us here today. Sergio.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I concur with that, and I also think that there's a sort of realization among the Australian people that thus far our attempts to enforce the law that our government can't destroy our future hasn't succeeded. And so what we're looking to do is develop the most more effective ways of serving out justice. And we're currently with this particular series of actions looking to replicate some of the examples from history where that has been particularly effective, which obviously is a sort of continual, quite sort of politically damaging protest, or whatever you want to call it, to the point of imprisonment, which is what we're sort of standing on the shoulder of giants for.
Well, speaking of history and speaking of the present, what can we expect in the future?
Sorry, that was to me, obviously.
Serge, do you want to speak to that?
Didn't realize that. Yes, so we are currently recruiting more people to do a dramatically scaled up version of what we have done. Our Prime Minister and our sort of government, I guess, is going to be, exposed on the global stage during the next COP talks for the criminals that they, I guess, the criminal actions that they have been engaged in. And what we're looking to do is basically embarrass our government by repeatedly getting in the way of the political system here in Australia, to the point that they put hundreds of people into prison, and there's a political crisis. So what we're looking to do is basically invite people either to Canberra or into their local areas to use this tactic, which is basically continual disruption to the point of imprisonment and beyond. But the basic sort of foundation of the ask is that we are recruiting people to be engaged in a resistance to this evil while they have their liberty. And obviously, at some point, the government is predicted to take away that liberty as they have with us.
Thanks, Serge. So I want to ask Violet possibly to talk about what are we doing this for? What does Extinction Rebellion demand? What are we trying to apply this pressure to achieve?
Yeah, well, Extinction Rebellion have 3 demands, and they are so simple and so beautiful and so necessary. And those demands are, first, that we must tell the truth and declare a climate and ecological emergency. This is about communicating the urgency for change that we have through institutions every day. Much like we do with COVID, we have 20 minutes of news on how that's running. We need to be having that about the habitability of our planet. Everybody needs to be involved and engaged on this issue. The second demand is to halt biodiversity loss and stop emissions by 2025. So, biodiversity, it's the interconnected life of our planet, and losing it is like taking bricks out of your house and expecting it still to stand. And then zeroing out emissions by 2025 is, so the best science that we have says that if we don't zero out by emissions by 2030, then it will be too late, that tipping points will already pass, and often science is conservative on these matters. And we say that if you the story is, if you've got a bus that you've got to catch at 3 p.m. and if you miss that bus, billions of people will die, you probably arrive 5 years early. So that's why we're aiming for 5 years early. And that kind of takes in for the lag, and also that people are already dying from this issue. And so in a lot of ways, it's already too late, but we need some sort of target. So yeah, and then the third demand, it's very clear that we have a government that is unable to deal with this situation appropriately. And so what we want to do is move over into deliberative democracy, or what we call citizens' assemblies. We've held 12 of them in Australia so far, and many around the world on really contentious issues. It's what the Greeks first imagined when they came up with democracy. And so, yeah, it's random representative selection of population coming together like jury duty. And I really believe in this process, and I believe that if people are given a chance to be advised by the science and really take time to acknowledge the issue, then they will come up with the appropriate result, the actions that we need to take. So yeah, those are the 3 demands, and I'm willing to risk my life and freedom for them, and I think that everybody in Australia should as well.
Quite so. Thank you, Violet. Just got a couple more questions for our brave rebels. Sergio, do you have a message for Australians?
Yeah, I do. My message for the citizens of this country is that it is no longer acceptable to continue as normal, because as normal means destroying our future, my future as a 22-year-old and the future of our children. And I wanted to share actually a sort of realization that I had in prison, which I think is quite appropriate for this current context. My realization was, which definitely was, yeah, so my cellmate, for example, my cellmate is of Aboriginal heritage, and he ultimately is in there for trafficking drugs, and the reason that he, ultimately had to do that was because he had a son and he wasn't able to find stable work. And he had a duty to his son and his family to provide for them. And obviously, in a situation where you can't find work because of, the color of your skin or your background, he turned to crime to provide for his family. And so what he's in there for is for sort of appropriately doing his duty to provide for his family. And the situation with the climate crisis is that the stability, the financial stability of this country, is basically collapsing. And what we have to do now as citizens of this country is basically go into rebellion against the government that is actively being a participant in destroying this country to the point of imprisonment in order to provide for our family, to put food on the table. So basically, it's no longer appropriate to do advocacy work like calling your MPs or signing petitions. What we're looking to do is mass participation, civil disobedience. And if the government doesn't like it, they can fit us into its prisons. But I would wager that there's way more of us than there is spots in their prisons. So as long as we continue to disrupt the main parts of the economy and political systems, we can get our demands met, and obviously that will mean that we will have to sacrifice something, just like our ancestors have.
Thanks, Sergio. Absolutely stirring. So we have a couple of more of the rebels who have participated in these actions are joining us. I see that Ross is here, and I see that Leslie's just popped in. I'm wondering, Ross, could we hear a little bit from you about the prison experience and your conviction?
Well, my conviction isn't much different from other people. My prison experience, I believe, is probably slightly different from the younger people. I think it has a lot to do with age. I'm a 62-year-old man, and so I look old. And in the men's prison where I was, Nick and I think we were treated with relative reverence almost. Not reverence, but at least we were respected. And I got the impression that Mark and Andy and probably Sergio, being younger and more the age of most of the other detainees there, I think they might have gotten a little bit more rough treatment. Anyway, it's a bit like going back in time. It's a bit like going back to school days when you're dealing with some bullies and some weirdos and some, it's its own little small community. And I I found it fascinating. And of course, these were guys that I generally wouldn't ever deal with in my regular life. So I found it absolutely fascinating. And I've made some good friends too. I'm now, talking regularly on the phone with Matt and a number of people. A very intelligent man he is. And for various reasons, he ended up getting incarcerated and living that way now. Anyway, I found it fascinating. I'd do it again. I feel it's really important to do it again. I feel it's important to stand up, be counted, and say, no, government, no, you cannot treat us this way. Thank you.
Thanks, Russ. It was great to hear from you. And I think we're probably getting close to wrapping up this little soiree. And last of all, I'd like to hear from Leslie. Have you got a message for Australia in light of your experience?
Yeah, sorry I'm so late, guys. Got my times mixed up. I'd just like to say that it's a powerful thing to do. It's a very humbling thing to do at the same time, because you realize that you're just one person in a great big organization of people, and when you voluntarily give over your power to this big organization, that it I don't know, it somehow brings you closer to the fact of where we're heading. It doesn't make sense that we're going to be in a place where we're going to have so little control over what happens in our lives, unfortunately, and it's kind of like good training for that. But it's a way of giving back to the generation. My generation has taken so much, and the generations before me, and we are now in the best position to be able to sacrifice our liberty. We don't have career concerns. We don't have all the things that young people have, like young children. We can do this. We get probably, I don't know if it's been spoken about already, more respect just being older. We don't have to worry so much about the violent aspects of prison, I think, as older people. We're not seen as such a threat. So I just urge everyone who is in a position to do this to really think about what a huge difference you could make, because it will work. There's no doubt about it if we just get the numbers. So everybody who can seriously needs to think about doing this, because it'll be so effective. It'll make such a change that I think you might be kicking yourself if you don't get involved. Let's put it that way. What did you do during the climate protests era, grandma or grandpa? Well, yeah, I went to prison because I love my grandchildren enough to do that.
Thank you, Leslie. And let that stand as our message to Australia and to the world. We engaged in this campaign, the beginning of the Duty of Care campaign, because we believe that we all have a duty to act to save the future for our children and our children's children. We have found the courage within ourselves to sacrifice what we think is necessary to bring about this change. And we call upon all Australians and all citizens around the world. Drop what you're doing. Our house is on fire, and we need to act right now.
Join the rebellion, ozrebellion.earth.
And so we will we will be back in Canberra and around the country in October. You can get in touch with us at ozrebellion.earth, like Violet said. And we hope to see you all joining us very, very soon.